So, I suppose, Woman G Car to today's session on massacres and the homeland violence. My name is Isobel Morphy-Walsh, and I'm a very proud Nurrumbullock woman from the Taun Wurrung peoples. And this is my wonderful colleague, Liz Suda.
Hello everyone, so I'm Liz and I'm the Program Coordinator for Humanities Education here at Melbourne Museum, and I'm very privileged to be working in the First Peoples area with Isobel and others.
Oh, I didn't say my job. I am the Senior Crew Programs Officer, so I run everything public facing that's First Peoples.
And now Curator.
Oh, and soon to be Curator.
Soon to be Curator.
Anyway, we'll move on to massacres. But first, before I do that, I just want to stop and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we're all either gathered, either here or where you are. So I happen to know that down at Macrob, you guys are firmly in Taun Wurrung country. So the Taun Wurrung are the mob who hug the coastline of Melbourne and move into the centre. And I happen to know that Elwood, you are too. So we've got two mobs who are on Taun Wurrung country. Where we're sitting, we happen to be on both Taun Wurrung country and Wurundjeri country. So I want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as well before we get into it.
As do I.
I suppose the first thing that I wanted to talk about in relation to the violence that occurred. So we're talking about this period after First Contact. First Contact was actually a little bit more, there was peace initially. Aboriginal people, we were part of a very complicated trade network across the entire region. In fact, there's evidence, like very specific evidence to light, that we were trading with the Macaskans, who are an Asian nation. We were trading then on with the Chinese sea urchins. We had treaties with different Pacific Island nations. There's even recent evidence coming to light to suggest that Aboriginal people in Victoria were potentially trading with Sri Lankan people in the 1600s, so well before the British arrived here. So we were used to different cultures and different groups of people coming onto our land to trade and interact with us. And in fact, we even had the British on our coasts for about 50 years before they decided to settle down here. They were catching whales and seals primarily for their blubber. So when the boats arrived, we largely thought that what was happening was what had always happened, that we were getting visitors who would eventually go home. It is when we realised that our visitors had no intention of going anywhere that conflict emerged, and boy howdy did conflict emerge. So we're kind of talking about the period after that where this conflict emerged. And I suppose the reason, there's a special reason that we're going to talk about this stuff, because this can be the hard stuff. This is the beginning of the hard stuff of the history of our country. You know, it's the stuff that can make you feel guilty or bad or sad or angry. If you feel any of those things, that means you're human. That means you're human and you can empathise and understand the stories that you're about to hear. We don't talk about them because I want, like Aboriginal people or me, the museum, we don't talk about it because we want you to feel sad or angry or guilty. We talk about it because we are going to make sure that it never ever happens again. And that is the power in these conversations, because every time we have these conversations, you all get a choice about whether this is a society that you accept and you get to live in. And I'd just like to start our session saying that essentially before we get into the meat and bones of it, because I think it's really important to understand when you do get hit in the heart that, you know, that's because it's sad. It's not because you're bad. It's because the situation is bad. Yeah. So, should we start with Lyndall Ryan?
Yeah, so this map that you're seeing here is the first attempt by an academic to map some of the evidence that's available in the historical record of massacres that have occurred throughout. Lyndall Ryan from Newcastle University, started on the eastern frontier of Australia but since then, since her initial work, we've discovered, and other people have come in and have started researching many other areas, which we're going to, with Isobel, take you through some of the other areas around Australia. Yeah.
Can I sort of just interrupt you? Because Liz there called it the frontier, which is what the majority of, if when you do your own personal research, that's the majority of what you're going to come across, this language of the frontier wars, frontier violence. That's a term I personally and my section of the museum reject, because they might have been the settlers' frontiers, but they weren't our frontiers. They were our homes. So we refer to this stuff as, and you'll hear me refer to this stuff as the homeland wars, because we never fought out of hatred. We never fought out of anger. We fought because we loved our homes, our culture, our families, and our people. That's why we fought.
So I think that's a really important thing, is to look at different perspectives. One of the things I just wanted to show you very quickly was that the historical record. The historical record is actually, there is written documentation of these acts of violence that were committed against Aboriginal people, and there are hundreds and hundreds of accounts of this in the history record. But what's really interesting now is that archaeologists are starting to do excavations, and you can have a look at some of these. We're going to send you all these links, so when you're doing your research, you can actually find some of these examples. And what they're doing is that they're actually digging into the earth to find examples of bullet shells and this kind of thing, which is actually providing proof, material proof, not just written accounts, but material proof that there were people killed. And so they're obviously finding skulls as well. They're finding burial sites. They're finding all sorts of things. And it reminds me that when the truth about what happened during the Holocaust in Europe occurred, there was something like 2 million people that weren't accounted for who were simply shot by the Einsatzgruppen, the Nazi kind of group. And there's one particular research that's been going on in Western Ukraine and through into Russia, where they're literally doing the same thing as these archaeologists. They're digging and finding material evidence that people were killed in the spot. So there's bones, there's bullet casings, and they can actually count how many people were shot based on the number of bullet casings that they're finding. And that's the kind of archaeology that's starting to happen in Australia as well, which is really interesting.
Do you know why these stories haven't come to the fore beforehand, Liz?
Well, that's a really interesting question, actually, Isobel, because when I was studying some 30 years ago, I did a subject called The Politics of Ethnic Minorities, and one of the documents that I read was a whole historical research of the historical record, what's been written by a master's student. And this has been known for a very long time, but it has not been included in our history books. So why is that? Is it we're not ready to hear it? Are we ready to hear it now?
I think the other thing that's really interesting to note about that time period is, according to British law, which is what we were primarily under at that time, because we're talking in the 1800s, we're talking before we federated. I mean, there was still violence going on after we federated, but right now we're talking before federation. It was actually British law that it was illegal to kill Aboriginal people. So they tried to, they put 2 men on trial for killing an Aboriginal man, and they got off. And it meant that within the rest of Australian squattocracy society at the time, there was a consensus that when this stuff went on, you didn't talk about it because they didn't want to be punished for what they were doing.
Yeah, some of the historical accounts are sort of descriptions by people. Oh, I heard Macmillan came in and there's a quote of something that he'd done. And so that makes the evidence really contested as well, because you've got different perspectives. Like you've got your storytelling that's passed down through family generations about what happened, and then you've got these historical records where people are not really wanting to own up to what actually happened, and then you've actually got some really good settlers who are wanting to say we can't have this going on, this is barbaric and we shouldn't be doing this. So there was contested views while it was happening as well. And that's what makes a study of this period of history really interesting, actually.
So we showed you the first map that Linda Ryan did, which was just of the east coast of the massacres and homeland violence on the east coast there. But now we want to show you the latest interactive map that The Guardian is pulling up.
Yeah, this is called the Killing Times. It's on the, if you make note of that, the Killing Times is a whole website that The Guardian, building on Linley Ryan's research, have actually started documenting much more, and they've got people out in the field gathering this information and building on what that eastern map was showing. So Isabel's going to, can you go through just quick examples of around Australia?
A few quick examples of different massacres or massacres or violence. First, I want to look at this Barrow Creek massacre in the Northern Territory. So 2 farmers were killed, and this is something that you're going to see repetitively throughout the massacres. Two non-Indigenous or coloniser farmers were killed, settlers were killed. So in retribution, they decided to basically kill every Aboriginal person in the area that they could find. And in this case, it meant 70 Aboriginal people died.
Yeah, you can see below, when you click onto that place, you can see the whole story written below. And this is where I'm saying there's contested versions of how many people. So maybe if we go to the Western Australian one, Isabel, the Flying Foam. So this massacre here in Western Australia is in an area called the Pilbara, and it's a big mining area. And I was actually there last year, and I stood at the place where the plaque is that says there were between 40 and 200 people killed. So this is where the contested history is really strong. So the Aboriginal people who own this land, this is the rocks in that area, really particular heavy, rich iron ore rocks. And they have got rock paintings on them that at the Murudja site that go back 60,000 years before the Ice Age. Some of these rock art creations were created. Here you can see on the left-hand side the thylacine etched into the rock. That would have taken a year to carve into that rock. It's like iron, that rock. And the thylacine has been extinct on the mainland for thousands of years. So that's a really important site. But what we know is that the people who are trying to protect that now are not the traditional owners of that area, because nearly all of them were wiped out in that Flying Foam massacre. And it was really eerie to stand on the site where a whole campsite of women and children were completely wiped out, and people were trying to escape by going to an island off the area. You can see some of the islands on the map. They were shot in the water. So really brutal killing of a whole group of people and families, children, babies, women, the lot. And it was because the same, I think Isabel, you'd know this story too, these white settlers had taken an Aboriginal woman, mm-hmm. and in trying to rescue her,
they killed him.
They killed the settler who had raped and taken their wife, and then the whole group were wiped out. So this is now orphan country.
Well, that's what happened to, so we're not actually going to share, we are going to watch some videos very shortly about some different massacres and violence that occurred in Victoria. And we're happy to. There's 5 videos in total, but we're only going to watch 3. So sadly, you're going to miss out on one of me. But my story that I talk about is actually basically the same as that. In Benalla, there was a group of pastoralists moving down across country. They were moving sheep from up in South Australia. They were moving them down across into Benalla to a man called Faithful's property. And on their way, they were collecting women and children and hurting them. And so a group of mob, both from the country that they'd been passing through, but also my mob, because they were coming onto our country, got together to enact what we would consider justice. And we attacked them, and 7 of them died. And it's funny because this is one of the first actually publicly listed and talked about massacres. They considered 7 white people that we'd killed a massacre, which is quite ironic to me when you see later on that there are hundreds and hundreds of Aboriginal people who died. And in particular, the way in which the local settlers dealt with this piece of violence is that they indiscriminately, for the next 3 months, killed every Aboriginal person that they came across on and around that piece of country. So even though we have the 7 colonisers recorded and documented, we actually have no record of the hundreds and hundreds of Aboriginal people who died, women, children, not just warriors, not the men involved, but anyone they could find.
And what the historical record also shows, Isobel, at this time, that you'd hear about this massive, big massacre, but then people would go back out into the country and just pick off people in their campsites, didn't they?
Mm-hmm. So I think we should just crack into a video looking at the timing. And perhaps I think what we're going to look at now is a beautiful, beautiful Aboriginal man, John Clark. He's going to be sharing a story from his country and from his people. Yeah.
I never learnt about history as such. I learnt about our story. My grandfather, he had no licence, so he used to sit in the back seat of the car with the kids. And as we drive through country, he'd speak about things, he'd point out lakes and mountains, and he'd tell stories about what happened there. And one of those stories that he did tell us about was Murdering Gully. To go there and experience that space is saddening. And there's a humility about it. When it comes down to it, people were murdered, families were destroyed. It is said, even by Europeans, that the creek flowed red for days afterwards. They were not trying to hurt anyone. In fact, many of them were fleeing. And they were actually coming together to seek refuge and solace in each other. They rode in and opened fire and shot everyone. Literally, there was only probably a handful of survivors who fled during the attack. The casualties included women and children and infants. One lady fled the scene on the morning of the attack, and she grabbed a baby. It wasn't her baby, it was just a baby. And she ran with that baby as far away as she could. She tied the baby to her back. She swam from one point of the lake to the other to seek refuge. She saved the life of this baby. She saved her own life. She saved generations to come afterwards. It was a cruel time, but out of that, Aboriginal people maintained a grace. In the face of such adversity, they were still being generous. They still contributed to the broader community, to the broader society, to country. And when I speak about country, I speak about everyone in it, and that includes non-Aboriginal people, and that they know how to relate to country. They know about these stories as well, even the hard stories. Aboriginal people didn't just disappear in the landscape. It was a violent frontier.
So that was John Clark telling that poignant story about the Western District. I'll briefly show you that on the map, I suppose. So let me just zoom in there. So Murdering Gully is there.
No, further
Oh
over.
gosh, there. I even marked it down, silly me. Anyway, that's where Murdering Gully took place. And I think what's really poignant about the story that John says, or the bit that hits me, is that because of that one woman's decision to carry that baby across the lake, there are generations of Gunditjmara people that now exist because of her one act of survival. So that's pretty special to me. Another one in Victoria, or I think I haven't done all of my ones I wanted to show you across the state. I also wanted to show you an incident up in New South Wales on the Broken River.
You see some of these names like Slaughterhouse Creek, Butchers Creek.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the other thing that most people don't realise. When you're travelling through the country and you go past Butchers Road, Butchers Gully, Butchers Creek, generally that name exists because it's a site of violence.
It's this one.
It's this one here, is it?
Yeah. Further on.
Further up there, Brewarrina. Hospital Creek. So I wanted to talk about this Hospital Creek one. I'll just point out this Hospital Creek one because 400 men and women and children were killed in this massacre, and there were only pickaninnies left, and that means babies. Infants were left over. But you can also imagine how the infants might have survived if literally everyone in their family and communities had died around them. Not high hopes for the pickaninnies there.
And it says motive unknown.
Motive unknown. And I think this is the hard thing. The biggest question I get asked when I talk about this stuff is why? Why did this happen? And to be honest, I don't think I'll ever fully understand that. And I mean, if you fully understand why that happened, please come and explain it to me. I can definitely see motivations of race and also land theft, but if I honestly don't think I'll ever be able to understand the mindset that gets into this stuff. So back into Victoria. So the area in which my story comes from is in this area around here. The story I told you about Benalla, around here. We also have, I wanted to talk Murdering Gully. Murdering Gully, that story that we just had from John, that's down here where this happened. So in this part of the country, down in the Western District. We're going to hear a story from Auntie Esther Kirby very shortly about Tintinda, a station there. And I just want to show you where that is. The Beveridges, they're a very well-known family. There's even a town on the Hume Highway named after the Beveridges. And then lastly, I wanted to just briefly talk about this whole sort of area of the country. This area of the country, there is a particular man, and you're gonna hear about him shortly. Rob Hudson's going to talk about him, and he actually their electorate seat is named after him. But literally everywhere he travelled across this region, there's reports of massacres. So he spent a good 10 years travelling and killing blackfellas indiscriminately, essentially. So I think we might go back and watch the story about Tintinda, the one up on the Murray.
As you can see, this is a beautiful piece of land here, and I understand why the Beveridge family chose to squat here but they didn't negotiate with the traditional owners of this land to be here. That was rule number one broken. Andrew Beveridge, he was the son of the early settlers that came here and claimed this land. And they come out here and they built homes and stuff, and they took a big lot of land. Some Aboriginal people they employed, and the other Aboriginal people were dismissed. They were moved off the land permanently. And, a lot of settlers come out and squatters come out, and they had no regard for Aboriginal law. They just took whatever they needed to take. Not what they needed, what they wanted to take. Andrew Beveridge, he took that woman and wouldn't give her back. Anyways, he got speared. That's why he's laying over there in that grave. And then the girl went back to her family. Then after that, they pretty much killed most of the Aboriginal fellas here. Hunted them down and shot them. But Andrew Beveridge should have done the right thing. Traded cattle off for that woman or let the woman go. I think we're at an age now where both these history can be talked about honestly, openly, without any anger or malice. You can't carry that because it'll ruin your life.
Sweet Auntie Esther reminding us once again why it is important to talk about this stuff, why it is important to maintain an open heart and how to move forward. And I think we should just crack into the last video as well.
Can we just say that all these videos, there's 5 or 6 of them that are available in the First Peoples exhibition in the Call to Fight section. So that's where you can see them in the actual gallery space.
You can see the visual beauty of this area, but when you start looking into it, you can see the pain, how this area has been stained and hurt for a long time. A lot of our people know about it, a lot of non-Indigenous people don't know about it, or they don't want to know about it. All the sites that are known throughout Gippsland are all known because they are recorded. Then there are sites that a lot of people know about, especially the blackfellas. All of our people, they talk about it all the time. And we go to places, well, I said don't go there at night or don't even step your feet in that area. That's where the white fellas shot and killed our old fellas. So in Aboriginal oral history, we know that it happened. Our people pass it down. They need to be acknowledged as well. They believe researchers before our Aboriginal oral history. People don't believe it until it's written down. You look at names, Skull Creek, Butcher's Ridge, Butcher's Creek, not named after a butcher. Most times it's named of what happened there. A lot of people live there, they have no idea what it means. I wanted to learn about the past history, the bad past, and the people that did this sort of stuff, such as the names of McMillan and his entourage. You go to streets where it's McMillan Street, you go to McMillan Strait, McMillan Hotel. His name is very common, and each spot you'll see a monument where Angus McMillan went, and each spot I can guarantee within a kilometre or less there was always a massacre within that area. In Gippsland we have no monuments of what happened to Aboriginal people, and it's heartbreaking really. Just a simple plaque acknowledgement. When does the hurt stop? When people start acknowledging it. Children and people today are so wanting to learn the truth. We're all hidden from the truth, and the more we acknowledge that happens, the better off Australia will be.
Point a lot is that I mean, certainly in my experience of growing up and going through the schooling system, I was always told that Australia was settled peacefully, that we were a peaceful nation. And I think you can't help but hear these stories and look into this stuff and hear this stuff and realise, actually, no, there was not peace when we were settled, when we were founded. It was not even peaceful for the settlers. It's just a complete myth that for some reason, which I will let you determine what you think that reason is. I have a few thoughts myself, but for some reason we pretend didn't happen. I want to talk about Macmillan, and in particular, I want to talk about Macmillan because his family have done something that I think is pretty amazing, and it's actually something that a few other settler or coloniser families are beginning to do now as well. So if we could go onto the Cat Flynn slide, that would be a grandiose bridge. So this is Cat Flynn, and she is the great niece of Angus Macmillan, who was, Angus Macmillan is who Rob was talking about in just that previous video that we were just watching. So Angus Macmillan is known to have been involved in numerous massacres. There's numerous recordings of placing him at the site, and he was kind of, through the readings and stuff, it's very clear that he was a big instigator of this. Cat Flynn, his great niece, she lives back over in England. She was born in England. She's part of the family that stayed there. And they had always heard and carried down through the generations that Angus Macmillan was this great explorer, that he went over to Australia and he discovered and explored things. And she got really curious about this man, because clearly he was like an important man. You know, there's a whole electorate named after him. There's numerous spaces, sites, streets. He's prolific. So she decided to come out here and have a look into who he was. And what she found out was pretty distressing for her. Hey, so she wrote this book all about what it is like to go through this process, to research and realize that part of the blood that runs through your veins has committed atrocities in the past, and how that made her feel and what that was about. And I think that it's a really interesting point, because we have a colleague here that's a historian here at the museum at the moment, who her family were key in perpetrating the Coniston massacre up in WA, I think. Northern Territory, my bad, which we'll also link you to. And she and her family have recently come out and said, hey, this is what my family did, and it's crappy, and we're sorry that it happened. We're sorry in the sense that they're not saying that they did it. They're not accepting responsibility for doing it. They're expressing empathy. They're expressing empathy and saying, this is not okay. This is not okay that this happened. And what that has meant that the descendants of the Aboriginal people that survived the massacre from that country, and her family were able to come together and actually heal. They're able to move forward, and they're able to put down that anger, the sadness, but also in Lisa's family, they were able to put down some of the guilt that they feel, because that's what talking about this and bringing it out into the open does. It allows us to feel it, to honour it, and then move forward choosing something different.
So Isobel, I'm just thinking we've got 5 minutes left. Do people have questions that they want to ask of Isobel? I've got one to start off with. If you want to organise your questions. You know, in that article with Cal Flynn talking about Macmillan, she actually meets with Ricky Mullet on country, in Gunnar Kerno country, and he asks her why she's doing it, why she wants to know this. And his answer to her is quite interesting. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you deal with when you're on the floor and delivering this material to people. When people get upset, what do you have to say to them?
Well, it's interesting. I was talking about all of our history. I was actually going through a bit of a tour, and I was talking about the homeland wars and the violence, and then I began talking about the stolen generation, and we even had a little bit of slavery, a little bit of a slavery conversation peppered in there. To be fair, the adults,
which there was a lot.
But also the adults had that I was with were kind of directing it in this direction. They were asking questions about this, and if you want to get me started on Australia's true history, I'm there. I'm there. I'll take you for a ride. Come with me. But this man came up to me. It was very funny because I was in the middle of talking and we were just moving on to a new section. And a woman who was in my group, she came up to me and she said, "I've really enjoyed this. I've learned so much, and you're so gentle and giving. Thank you." And I'm like, "Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's no good. I'm glad." But then a man came up directly after her as we were still moving, and he said, "Well, I'm not enjoying it. It's too painful. It hurts too much." And I don't know. I'm still thinking over this response. This moment has actually affected me quite significantly. It only happened a week ago. But I said to him, "Sir, if this hurts you right now to hear, can you imagine what it's like growing up, being 27 years old and knowing every single day of your life that you're a survivor of an attempted genocide? Knowing every single, there's never a day that I wake up that I'm not the daughter of a man who was stolen from his mum at 18 months old. There's never a day that I wake up that I'm not the descendant of a survivor of a massacre. There's never not a day where where this history doesn't run in my veins. And the thing is, I think people don't understand this. Within Aboriginal cultures, our old ones and respecting our old ones and carrying their stories is something sort of integral to us. It's there's many integral things, but that's one element of it. So we literally get taught this stuff from growing up. I grew up in Benalla. I knew about the Benalla massacre and then the reprisal killings. And in fact, I lived opposite Butcher's Road, where I grew up. We didn't actually ever go down that road because we knew massacre had occurred there, and we certainly didn't go there at night. We would sometimes go through the day and do smoking stuff anyway, but smoking stuff is in traditional smoking ceremony stuff, just to clarify, which is helping the land heal. But I this is stuff these scars are invisible, but I walk around with them all the time. And he said, "Oh, I'd never thought about it like that." Anyway, as I said, it affected me that he was so pained. So I went up to him at the end of our session, and I said to him, "Sir, I've been thinking about what you said to me and about the pain they feel and how it's tricky. And I just want to remind you that I'm going to give you a message that my elders have given me. They said to me, we have never hated white people. We never want anyone to feel guilty for who they are and how they've come to be in this country. That's a fait accompli now. It is how it is. What we do want is to acknowledge this, to be able to hold our old ones and their stories, but also to move forward knowing that the young ones are never going to have to face this stuff again. Because, you can imagine, as the daughter of a stolen man, how frightened he was that his own children would be taken from him. And he wants to ensure that this will never happen to other Aboriginal families and children. And it's the same thing in terms of these massacres and homeland violence. We want to ensure that who is here now in Australia calling this place home knows exactly what happened on this country, because also there are some amazing, beautiful things that have happened on this country that can make us all richer by understanding. But essentially, we talk about this because we want to walk hand in hand with you in the future. We want you to be with us and we want to be with you. And that's why we talk about it. And he said, I hadn't thought about it like that either. So I don't know.